After lunch, Sophie and Joe decided to clean out the chicken house. Joe needed the old straw for his pumpkin patch in the orchard, and Sophie thought that if they worked together, they might get both jobs completed before the children came home from school. The rest of the day could then be spent doing something with the children. "Weather's good," she said. "We could have a bonfire on the beach. Roast potatoes, ghost stories, singing with guitars, all that stuff." "You have to let them grieve," said Joe, forking out straw from under the perches. "You can't hurry it or cover it over with a party." I know, said Sophie. "I'm feeling my own grief for Hannah. She's in such pain, Joe. Maybe we'll just have a bonfire and a quiet family talk, eh?" "Okay," said Joe. "Let's get it over with." "You mean tell them he's dead? Better sooner than later." "How?" "Heart attack. Died in his sleep." Sophie piled the straw into the wheelbarrow. "Sleep," said Joe. "And we'd better get it right because they're going to ask a lot of questions. Sky will want to know about a funeral. He's been really big on funerals since Grandpa died." "We'll say he was cremated." "Can you cremate a horse?" "I don't see why not." Joe stood up, leaning on the fork. It would have been simpler to have told them in the first place. "What?" said Sophie. "Joe, in the face of harsh fact, we chose fiction. They're good, loving kids. They deserve a good, loving story." She picked up the handles of the barrow. "Where do you want this dumped?" They sprayed the chicken house for mites, put in fresh straw, and then went down to the orchard to layer the straw with compost on the pumpkin bed and water it for planting. They had almost finished when Marie Gerritson's yellow Toyota truck came into the bay. She stopped on the road near the orchard fence and called out, "More giant pumpkins!" "Hello, Marie," Sophie called back. "You're not teaching today?" "This morning only." Marie got out of the truck with a large plastic bottle and leaned over the fence. "I brought some ginger beer down for the children. It's been bounced around a bit. Tell them to be careful taking the top off." "Wow, ginger beer!" Joe walked over to the fence. "Thanks, Marie. They'll be wrapped. We'll put it in the fridge until they come home from school." Marie looked puzzled. "I thought they were home." "Not yet." "But they're not at school." Sophie came over to join them. "Our children. Hannah and Mikey and Sky." "They haven't been at school all day," said Marie. "They went on the bus this morning." Sophie's voice was tense. "No, I waited and tooted." "But I saw them walking down the drive," said Sophie. "Hannah was wearing her pink sweatshirt. Sky had his new reading book." "You mean you haven't seen them all day?" Joe said. Marie shook her head. "Hans said that Mikey and Hannah were pretty upset yesterday. He just thought you'd kept them home. I should have checked." "Upset?" said Sophie. "Hans read a note which Mikey wrote to Hannah in class. It was about Shadrach and the pet food factory." "But they didn't know about that," Sophie said. Marie smiled and shook her head. "Everyone at school knows." Sophie and Joe looked at each other, amazed at their stupidity. Oh, they should have realised. In a place like this, of course they should have known. "They've run away," said Sophie. "That's what they've done." "Gone to Nelson," Joe said. "But how would they get out of the sounds?" Sophie asked. "No one's going to give a ride to 3 children without asking questions." She glanced at Joe. "No one who could be trusted." "Don't worry," said Marie. "They won't be out of the sounds. Probably just a few kilometres down the road. Do you want me to go and look for them?" "Thanks, Marie," said Joe. "But we have to go." "They'd better be all right," said Sophie in sudden anger. "They'd better be okay, that's all." Joe knew she was close to tears. He put his arm around her. "Of course they're okay. You put some petrol in the car. I'm going back to the house to phone the Buff Stuff factory." While Joe was away, Marie helped Sophie fill the car from the farm tank. She listened while Sophie told her about the home for aged equestrian friends. "We couldn't tell them," Sophie said. "Not Hannah. You know what the girl's like. She'd never get over it. She knows now, Marie said. The best thing that can happen is, as you say, they're down the road a few kilometres. We pick them up and bring them home. You know what the worst thing is? Somehow they get to Nelson and go to that dog meat place. He was being killed today. Right now he's being, well, whatever they do to them. There's no way they could have got to Nelson. I went mushrooming once on this farm where they kept hunting dogs. You know, hounds to run with horses. And they just killed an old horse for dog food. Everything left over got thrown into the creek. I saw it. A horse's head and 2 legs lying amongst the watercress. No one would have given them a ride, Marie insisted. Joe came running back. As he came close, Sophie saw that he was smiling and her fear disappeared. They're in Nelson, Joe said. They're all right. How did they get there? Sophie said. Who gave them a lift? Said Marie. Haven't a clue. Joe laughed, then put his hands over his head in a gesture of despair. What do you want first? Comedy? Tragedy? The manager says he's going to sue us. They've got Shadrach, Sophie cried. Yes, they've got Shadrach. According to Mr. Craig Benny, they also flooded his factory. They released 18 valuable horses and chased them through the town. And, get this, they tried to drown Benny in a cesspool. No, said Sophie. They wouldn't do those things. He says he's been trying to phone us all afternoon. He wants $3,000 damages. I asked him if he'd called the police. For some obscure reason, he hasn't. Nor did he take to the idea. Oh, they tried to drown him, Sophie said. They were there about 2 hours ago. He hasn't seen them since. They won't be hard to find. Shadrach's not your average-sized pet. Hop in, Sophie. Joe, I just know they wouldn't do things like that. Honey, of course they wouldn't. Craig Benny is the least of our worries. Those kids will be tired and hungry. They've got a horse that's ready to collapse on top of them. And it's 3 hours to Nelson. Let's go. My parents live near Nelson, said Marie. I'll ask them to do a bit of a search. Thanks, Marie. We'll keep in touch by phone, in case you hear anything. Marie smiled. I'll put the ginger beer in your fridge. Joe chose to drive. He went faster than usual, skidding on the gravel, slewing round corners, leaving a long plume of dust behind them. On the sealed surface of the main road, he increased his speed. They rocketed through Havelock, well above the 50-kilometre limit, overtaking every vehicle in front of them. Sophie asked him to slow down. They're our kids, said Joe. It's an emergency. It'll be an emergency if we have an accident, Sophie said. 3 kids without parents. And they did almost have an accident. On the winding hill road near Nelson, Joe had to swerve violently to miss a Holden ute with a large green caravan.